There's a moment in the life of every great power when wealth stops coming from what you make and starts coming from what you manage. The factories fall quiet. The trade routes reverse. For a time, everything feels fine. Better than fine, actually. Richer. This is the moment historians look for when they study collapse, not because it means the end is near, but because it means the structure has changed in ways that are very difficult to reverse. Economic power has always rested on a simple foundation, the ability to produce things the world needs: steel, ships, textiles, energy, tools. The empires that controlled production controlled trade. They set prices, they built navies, they dictated terms. Production creates leverage. It means you are selling more than you are buying. It means other nations depend on your output. It means your currency has weight because it is backed by goods people actually need. When you produce, you export products and import wealth. That wealth funds everything else: your military, your infrastructure, your institutions. It is not just about money, it is about self-sufficiency and strategic independence. But production is hard, it is loud and dirty, it requires constant investment, worker training, resource management, and long-term planning. It ties up capital in factories and machinery that take years to pay off. So when empires grow wealthy enough, something predictable happens. The incentives shift. Why build things when you can finance the people who build them? Why manage factories when you can manage investments? Why export goods when you can export capital and simply take a cut of everyone else's production? This is the transition from maker to manager, from producer to financier, and at first it works beautifully. The British Empire made this shift in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Britain had been the workshop of the world with coal, steel, textiles, and ships. But by the 1870s, competitors like Germany and the United States were catching up. Their factories were newer, and their costs were lower. Rather than match them, Britain took a different path. It became a global banker. The City of London financed railways in Argentina, mines in South Africa, and infrastructure across Asia. British capital flowed everywhere, earning returns without the trouble of production. The empire felt wealthier than ever. Financial services boomed. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. London's influence seemed unshakable, but underneath something had changed. Britain was importing more than it exported. It was buying steel from Germany and textiles from India and Japan. The factories that had built the empire were closing or falling behind. The wealth was still there, but the foundation was not. When World War I arrived, Britain discovered it could not produce enough shells, ships, or munitions to sustain the fight without outside help. The war exposed the gap between financial wealth and industrial capacity, and after the war, the gap only widened. By the mid-20th century, Britain was no longer economically sovereign, it was dependent. The empire had not collapsed overnight, but its structural position had quietly eroded for decades. The Ottoman Empire offers a different version of the same pattern. For centuries, the Ottomans controlled critical trade routes between Europe and Asia. They did not just tax the goods passing through, they produced many of them. Ottoman textiles, weapons, and ships were competitive, even dominant. But by the 18th century, that began to change. European powers were producing cheaper goods with better technology. Rather than modernize their own production, the Ottoman leadership doubled down on what still worked: taxation, trade management, and borrowing. The empire remained vast and wealthy in appearance. It controlled territory, it collected revenue, but it was no longer making the things its economy ran on. European manufacturers supplied the goods. European banks supplied the credit. The Ottomans became consumers of other people's production. And once that shift happened, political power followed economic power. The empire became a debtor. Its sovereignty became negotiable. By the 19th century, the Ottoman finances were effectively controlled by foreign creditors. The empire lasted another century, but it was structurally hollow. It had wealth without production, influence without independence. This is the pattern. And it's not about incompetence or bad leadership, it's about incentives. Once an empire becomes rich, production starts to look unattractive compared to finance. Manufacturing is capital intensive and low margin. Finance is flexible and high margin. Moving money is easier than moving goods. So capital shifts, investors pull out of factories and pour into banks, real estate, and speculation. The most talented people stop going into engineering and start going into law and finance. The economy grows, but it grows in ways that don't strengthen the underlying structure. For a while, this looks like progress. GDP rises, asset values soar, the wealthy feel wealthier, but the economy becomes dependent on inflows of foreign goods and foreign capital, and that dependence creates vulnerability. When you cannot produce what you need, you are negotiating from weakness. You cannot withstand supply shocks. You cannot sustain prolonged conflict. You cannot set terms. You are along for the ride. The United States became the world's dominant economic power by being the world's producer. In the 20th century, America made everything: cars, steel, planes, electronics, and machinery. It exported goods and ran trade surpluses. The rest of the world needed what America made. That's not the case anymore. Since the 1980s, American manufacturing has steadily declined as a share of the economy. Factories moved overseas, supply chains globalized, entire industries migrated to Asia, and in their place, the US built the largest financial sector in history. Today, America runs a massive trade deficit. It imports far more than it exports. It borrows to sustain consumption. The economy is built on services, finance, real estate, and technology platforms, not on producing physical goods. This has not caused collapse. In many ways, America seems wealthier than ever. The stock market is at record highs. The dollar remains the global reserve currency. American companies dominate global finance and tech. But the structure has changed. The United States is now dependent on foreign production for most of its goods. It relies on East Asian factories for electronics, medicine, and machinery. It relies on global supply chains it does not control. And it sustains this system by running enormous deficits and issuing debt that other countries purchase. This works until it does not. Until the debt becomes unsustainable. Until the dollar's reserve status is questioned, until a crisis demands production capacity that no longer exists. The pattern does not predict timing. It does not mean collapse is imminent or inevitable. The British Empire managed its decline over decades. The Ottomans lasted a century after the structural shift became clear. But what the pattern does show is that this is a vulnerable position. Historically, empires that stop producing do not return to production. The capital is gone. The expertise is gone. The infrastructure is gone. And once other nations fill that role, they rarely give it back. America's not Britain in 1920 or the Ottomans in 1850. But it is following a script that has been performed before. The wealth is undeniable. The power is still immense. But the foundation has quietly changed. And history suggests that once this change takes hold, it is very difficult to reverse. There is no conclusion here that ties things neatly together. The question is not whether America will collapse or when. The question is whether this moment, this specific structural configuration, has ever been stable for long. History has an answer to that question. We are just living inside it now.